You won't believe what my own daughter told me after I lost everything. After years of sacrifice, raising her on my own, and giving her everything I had, I stood on her front porch with nowhere else to go, only to be told I ruined her aesthetic. That was the moment everything changed. And if she thought I'd go away quietly, she never really knew the woman who raised her. Subscribe if you believe in second chances, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I never imagined I'd end up on my daughter's doorstep with a suitcase in one hand and ashes in the other. The smoke still clung to my clothes, stubborn as regret. My home had burned to the ground the night before. Every photo, every memory, every part of my life reduced to soot and silence. And in the wake of that silence, I found myself standing in front of the woman I gave everything to, hoping, praying, needing something I hadn't asked for in decades. Her house was spotless, one of those new builds. Stone facade, tall black door, potted plants arranged just so. It looked like a catalog cover. The porch light bathed her in a golden halo as she opened the door, wearing a white cardigan over a silk blouse, not a hair out of place. She didn't ask why I was there, didn't look at the suitcase or the soot on my coat. She didn't even flinch. She just looked me over like I was a mismatched cushion on her beige couch. And then she said it. "You can't stay here, Mom. You ruin the aesthetic." I don't remember what I said after that. I think I nodded. Maybe I mumbled something. But I do remember the way the door closed. Soft, final, like the punctuation at the end of a long, cruel sentence. That sound stuck with me all night. I ended up at the Oakview Inn off I. $28 a night. Smelled like wet carpet and mildew, but it had a bed and a lamp and a mirror too cracked to reflect me properly. Maybe that was a mercy. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in my lap. I wanted to call someone, but I didn't have anyone to call. I raised Emily alone. Her father left when she was 10, left me with a mortgage, a daughter, and a broken-down Buick that wouldn't start in the rain. I worked days at the diner and nights sewing for a tailor shop just to make rent. I never remarried, never had the time, never wanted to bring another man into my daughter's life unless I was sure he'd stay, and none ever did. Emily got straight A's, went to college on a scholarship. She became a nutritionist, married a plastic surgeon, and moved to Charleston. I watched her climb the ladder of perfection. New car, new house, new friends. I was proud. But with every step she took toward her new life, it felt like she was stepping further away from me. Still, I never imagined she'd lock me out when I had nowhere else to go. At the motel, I cried quietly, so no one in the next room would hear. I'm not a crier. Not even when I lost my job not even when I buried my sister without a single family member beside me. But that night, I cried until my throat ached, because for the first time, I realized something terrible. I had become inconvenient, an eyesore, a stain on the canvas of her carefully curated life. The next morning, I took a long walk. I didn't know where I was going, but my feet led me to an old neighborhood, Oakwood Terrace, where I'd raised Emily in a 2-bedroom clapboard house with a chain-link fence and a backyard full of dandelions. I hadn't been back in years. That's where I saw Velma. She was sitting on her porch, shelling peas into a big metal bowl like she used to when we were younger. She squinted at me, then let out a laugh so loud it made the birds scatter. "Maggie Walker," she said, hopping off her rocker like she hadn't aged a day. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't tell her everything right away. Just enough that I was staying at the Oakview, that I needed some air, that I was figuring things out. Velma's eyes were sharp, and she didn't buy it. "You're not figuring things out, sugar. You're trying not to fall apart." We sat for hours, talked about old times, about our daughters, about the years that had run off like wild horses. And then, like always, Velma cut through my silence with a single sentence. "You still got fight in you, Maggie. You just forgot how to throw a punch." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in that motel bed and thought about everything I'd done for Emily, the years I gave up for her, the way I'd put her first every single day of her life. And now I wasn't even good enough to sit on her damn couch. At a.m., I got up and opened the little black notebook I kept in my purse, the one where I wrote every penny I'd ever saved, the one with all the numbers I never told anyone about. Stocks, old CDs, sewing money, I added it all up. I had just enough. Not enough for revenge, but enough for something better. 2 weeks later, I found the house. Big white columns, wraparound porch, views of the marsh. It was listed as a Southern belle's dream. Emily had once circled a picture of a similar house in a magazine when she was, and said, "One day, I'm going to live there." I bought it in cash. And then I took a picture of it. Fresh white paint, manicured lawn, a red for sale sign in front. I texted it to her with no caption, just the image. It took less than 5 minutes for her to call. "Mom?" Her voice was tight. "Why did you send me a picture of that house?" "Because I bought it," I said. She was silent. "It's yours," I added. "Or it could be, but I'm thinking of selling it." Her voice trembled. Why would you do that?" "Because, sweetheart," I said, as calm as I'd ever been in my life, "it fits your aesthetic." I hung up before she could answer, and for the first time in years, I smiled. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't know, is that this wasn't just about a house. This was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would break us and maybe put us back together, eventually. But first, there were secrets to be unearthed, and I was about to discover that Emily wasn't the only one who'd been hiding things all these years. She didn't call again that night. I half expected her to. Maybe to scream, maybe to cry, maybe to tell me I was being dramatic. But silence settled in like fog around a cemetery, thick, cold, and full of the things people don't say. I stayed another night at the Oakview Inn, though the mattress felt harder now, and the hum of the vending machine outside my door was louder than I remembered. I stared at the ceiling and let the stillness stretch. I wasn't rushing this. For once, I was the one in control. The next morning, I went back to the house, the one I bought. It sat on a hill, proud and wide, with a porch that begged for Sunday morning coffee and gossip. I walked through it room by room. The hardwood floors creaked under my steps like they were remembering their past. The air smelled of lemon polish and something older, deeper, like history waiting to be rewritten. The dining room had a crystal chandelier that caught the morning light and fractured it into tiny rainbows on the walls. I imagined Emily sitting at the head of the table, wine in hand, trying to impress her guests. I wondered if she'd ever see it as more than a photo on her phone. And then she showed up. I was in the sunroom, sipping cold coffee from a paper cup, when I heard the tires crunch on the gravel driveway. I didn't move, just waited. After a minute or two, I heard the front door open. She'd used the key I sent in the mail 2 days ago, wrapped in a velvet pouch. "Mama?" Her voice was soft, unsure. I stayed silent. She found me eventually, her heels clicking across the wooden floor like gunshots. She looked like she hadn't slept. Eyes puffy, hair slightly frizzed at the edges, not her usual polished self. "You really bought this?" she asked, eyes darting around the room like it might vanish if she blinked too hard. I nodded. "Why?" I leaned back in the wicker chair. "Because you said I ruined your aesthetic. I figured I'd find one that suited you better." Her face crumpled for a moment, just a flicker. Then the wall went back up. She straightened her shoulders. "This isn't funny, Mom. I'm not laughing. You sent me a picture of a house you knew I'd love, and then put a for sale sign on it? I thought you liked signs." She blinked. "Is this revenge?" "No," I said. "It's a mirror." We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "You don't understand how things are now. My world, it's curated, structured. Everything has a place, a look, a standard. And I don't fit in that?" She swallowed. "You're unpredictable. You say things. You don't think about how it sounds, and you don't try to blend in." I stared at her. "I didn't raise you to blend in. I raised you to stand tall." She looked away. "Is that why you've been rewriting things?" I asked, voice low. Her head snapped back toward me. "What are you talking about? You told people your father left and never looked back. But that's not the truth, is it?" Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came. I stood up, walked over to a drawer I'd filled earlier with the contents of a dusty box from my old house. I pulled out an envelope, worn, bent at the corners, and handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter. It was from her father, dated 8 years after he left. He'd tried to come back, begged for forgiveness, said he'd found God, found purpose, found the strength to be a better man. Said he'd visited twice but wasn't allowed through the door. Her lips moved as she read. Then her knees gave out, and she sank onto the couch. I told him to leave," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "He called. I answered. He said he wanted to see us. I told him we didn't need him. I was 16. I thought I was protecting you. I sat beside her, heart pounding. I was angry. You worked so hard. He left you with everything. I wanted to punish him. And so you erased him. Tears filled her eyes. I never told you. I didn't think you'd forgive me. I reached for her hand. She flinched at first, but then let me hold it. There's more than one way to ruin a home, Emily, I said quietly. Sometimes it's not fire. Sometimes it's silence. We sat there for a long time, the weight of years pressing down on both of us. I don't deserve this house, she said finally. That's not for me to decide. Her eyes found mine. What if I wanted to earn it? I didn't answer, just looked out the window at the garden overgrown with wildflowers, life pushing through the cracks. Then we'd have to start again, I said. And it won't be easy. I don't want easy, she said, voice breaking. I want you back. A part of me softened. But another part, the part that remembered the cold porch light and her perfect cardigan, held firm. Then don't say it, I whispered. Show it. She nodded. And just like that, the first brick of the wall between us cracked. But as I would soon learn, the house wasn't the only thing full of secrets. There was one more envelope in that box, and it would change everything. It was a yellowed envelope, sealed with brittle tape and buried at the very bottom of the box. I hadn't noticed it until the day after Emily left the house in tears, promising to try. Funny how a single piece of paper can wait patiently for decades, never moving, never aging, until the exact moment it's meant to break you wide open. I stared at it for a while, sitting at the small breakfast nook where the morning sun hit just right. Outside, the wind tugged gently at the for sale sign I hadn't bothered to take down yet. Maybe part of me wanted it to stay there a little longer, like a challenge, like a dare. When I finally opened the envelope, the handwriting nearly stopped my heart. It was his, Daniel's. I hadn't seen his handwriting in over 30 years, but I'd know it anywhere. Sharp, slanted, hurried, like he was always halfway out the door, even when he was sitting still. I could hear his voice in the scratch of every letter. The letter was dated just 4 years ago. 4. Not decades. Not ancient history. Not some dusty relic from the time when cassette tapes were still a thing. This was recent. Maggie, if this finds you, it means I finally found the nerve to try again. I don't have the right to ask you for anything, but I've spent the last 10 years trying to make peace with the man I used to be. I was a coward. I let my fear and my failure eat me alive. But I want you to know, leaving you was the worst mistake of my life. I tried to come back. Twice. Emily wouldn't let me through the door. She said you were better off, that you'd moved on, that I'd only bring pain. I stopped reading. My hands trembled. My eyes blurred. I could still see her. 16, sharp-tongued, brittle with pride. She'd always been protective, even as a child, fiercely loyal to me and furious with the world for making her grow up too soon. But this? She'd kept this from me. For years. I pressed the letter to my chest and rocked slightly in the chair. There was a pain in me I couldn't name. Not betrayal exactly. More like grief given a second life. When I finished the letter, I learned that Daniel had remarried once. Briefly. No children. His wife had died of cancer, and afterward he'd moved to Tennessee, lived simply, worked at a used bookstore, wrote letters he never sent. The last line undid me. If I don't get to see you again in this life, know that I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped hoping for one more chance. I had to find him. I didn't know why. Not exactly. Closure, maybe. Or the need to look him in the eye and decide, once and for all, if there was anything left between us. Velma was the first to notice something had shifted. You've got that old fire in your eyes again, she said, leaning over the fence between her porch and mine, a cigarette dangling from her fingers. You going somewhere? Tennessee, I said, folding laundry on the porch. Maybe for a few days, maybe longer. She raised an eyebrow. That where the bones are buried? I smiled, barely. No, but maybe it's where I left part of myself. 3 days later, I drove west. I hadn't been on a road trip alone in decades. I kept the windows down and the radio low. I passed through towns with names I couldn't pronounce and diners that served coffee so strong it could wake the dead. By the time I got to the address in the letter, a little one-story home with faded blue shutters, it was dusk. There was a for rent sign out front. My stomach dropped. I knocked anyway. A thin woman in her 40s opened the door. She looked confused when I asked for Daniel Walker. He passed away last spring, she said softly. I'm the landlord now. It was like the ground disappeared beneath me. He died? She nodded. Pancreatic cancer. It was fast. Didn't even make it 3 months after diagnosis. I couldn't breathe. I didn't cry. I just stood there, numb. Then the woman said, "Are you Maggie?" I blinked. Yes, she smiled, warm and kind. He talked about you, all the time, said you were the one that got away. He left something for you. She led me inside. The house smelled like old books and lemon oil. On a shelf near the window was a small box, wooden, carved with tiny birds. Inside were photos of me and Emily from years ago, a pressed flower from our wedding, and another letter. This one was shorter. You were my lighthouse, even when I drifted. I hope you found happiness. I hope you knew deep down that I always loved you. And if there's still a chance, wherever I am, I'll be waiting. I don't remember the drive back, only that the sun was rising by the time I reached Charleston again. I pulled into the driveway of the house and sat for a long time. Emily's car was already there. She was sitting on the porch steps, knees pulled to her chest, makeup streaked down her face. When I got out, she stood but didn't speak. I walked up slowly, the letter from Daniel still in my coat pocket. I didn't hand it to her. Not yet. I know, she said, before I could open my mouth. I know about the letter. I know you know. I nodded. Why, Emily? I thought I was protecting you, she whispered. I thought he didn't deserve you. I was wrong. I know that now. I searched her face, really looked, and for the first time in years, I saw the little girl who used to curl up beside me when the power went out, the one who believed I could fix anything. I forgave him, I said. She choked out a sob. Can you forgive me? I didn't answer. Not yet, because forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't a lightning bolt. It's a slow rain. It takes time. And I needed her to feel it, earn it, carry it like I carried her. The truth was out now, but the story was far from over, because redemption isn't given, it's built. And I had an idea of how we could start. It started with paint, not expensive wallpaper, not marble countertops, just paint, white, soft yellow, lavender in the bedrooms, warm, welcoming colors. Emily rolled the first coat on the living room wall herself, hair tied up in a knot, sleeves rolled back. Her designer nails were chipped by the end of the first day, and she didn't even notice. She was trying. I could feel it in the way she moved around the house, not as its new owner, but as someone relearning what it meant to belong somewhere. The mansion, once a symbol of perfection and pretense, began to breathe like a living thing. The curtains came down. The gleaming Art Deco chandeliers were swapped for soft Edison bulbs. She even let Velma choose the kitchen tile. Lord help her. We worked side by side, me, Velma, a few old friends from the neighborhood who hadn't seen Emily since she wore braces. They all came back, not for her name, but for what the house was becoming. Not a home, a haven. We named it Rose Harbor, a transitional residence for older women cast aside by family, abandoned by partners, or simply left behind by the world. Women like me, like Velma, like so many who had nowhere to go when life decided they were no longer useful. It was Emily's idea. I want to fix what I broke, she told me one night, as we painted the porch swing a deep teal. Not just between us. I want to be someone who makes space for women like you, women like us. I didn't say much. I just kept painting. But something in me softened. A knot inside my chest slowly came undone. 3 months later, the house opened its doors. We held a gathering on the front lawn. Nothing fancy. Plastic chairs, lemonade, peach cobbler, a band made up of high school kids from down the street. I wore the same navy dress I'd worn to Emily's graduation. It still fit. Emily stood on the porch and addressed the crowd. My mother built me a life when she had nothing, she said, voice shaking. I turned my back on her when all she asked for was a place to sleep. I was cruel. I was selfish. And she didn't repay me with anger. She repaid me with a gift I didn't deserve. But today, I'm asking for something better than forgiveness. I'm asking for a second chance. The crowd was silent. Then a few people clapped. Then more. Then everyone. I cried quietly in my chair, dabbing at my eyes with a napkin that smelled like barbecue sauce. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I sat on the porch steps and watched the stars blink into the sky. Emily brought me a glass of iced tea, sat beside me, and leaned her head on my shoulder like she used to when she was little. You were right, she whispered. A house doesn't make a home. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the deed, folded, worn, signed over to her name months ago. I already gave this to you, I said. But I want you to really understand what that means. She stared at it. You get the house, I said. But Rose Harbor stays. The women stay. The mission stays. She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I won't let you down again. I squeezed her hand. Then we'll be fine. A week later, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Me and Daniel from a summer picnic when Emily was 3. We were smiling at each other like no one else existed. On the back, in that same slanted handwriting, were 6 words. You made it home. I knew. I don't know who sent it. Maybe one of his bookstore co-workers. Maybe God. Maybe just the wind carrying things where they're meant to go. All I know is that the house is never quiet now. There's laughter in the halls, stories being told in rocking chairs on the porch, women dancing in the kitchen at midnight. There are scars here, yes, but also healing, also grace. Emily still gets frustrated sometimes. She hasn't lost that sharpness, but she laughs more now, holds me tighter when she hugs me. And when she introduces me to new residents, she says, "This is my mother, Margaret. She's the reason all of this exists." And I smile. Because I am. I was never a perfect mother, but I was her mother. And in the end, that was enough to build something that mattered, something beautiful, something that didn't just fit an aesthetic, something that saved us both. It had been exactly 6 days since Emily's confession on the porch. 6 days since she said the words I'd waited 30 years to hear. I want you back. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't ready to be back just yet. You see, healing isn't just about putting the broken pieces together. Sometimes it's about staring at the shattered mess long enough to understand why it broke in the first place. And for me, that meant going back to the beginning. I hadn't visited Oakwood Terrace in nearly a decade, but on that 7th morning, I found myself driving down its cracked streets, past the overgrown lots and rusted mailboxes. That neighborhood raised me as much as I raised Emily, and buried beneath its peeling paint and forgotten porches were answers I didn't know I still needed. The house I'd raised Emily in was still standing, barely. The paint had long since flaked off. The fence leaned like it was tired of standing. But the tree in the front yard, the one she used to climb every summer, was taller, stronger, blooming with white blossoms that looked like little bursts of hope. I stepped out of the car and just stood there. And that's when I saw her, Mrs. Loretta Mason. She'd lived across the street when I was still packing lunchboxes and patching jeans. She had to be in her 80s now, but she looked just as elegant as ever, sitting on her porch with a wide-brimmed hat and a mug of tea, like time hadn't dared to touch her. "Maggie Walker," she called out. "Is that you?" I laughed through the lump in my throat and walked across the street. We talked for hours, about the old days, about how the neighborhood had changed, about how we had changed. And then, out of nowhere, she said something that froze me in my chair. "I always wondered what really happened between you and Daniel." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" She sipped her tea, slow, deliberate. "I saw him. A few years after he left. He came by the house asking if I knew where you'd moved. Said he was trying to find his girls." My heart pounded. "You never told me." She looked down, guilty. "I didn't want to stir up pain. But now that I see you again, I think maybe that was wrong. Maybe you needed to know he tried." That was the second time someone told me he came back, and it finally clicked. Emily didn't just close the door on her father. She buried the truth, all of it, out of pain, out of fear, maybe out of love, twisted and misdirected. But it had left me living in a false version of my own story for decades. I went back to the house, not the old one, my house, the one I bought with the porch swing and the columned front. The one that still had the for sale sign out front, leaning slightly now from the wind. When I stepped through the door, the air felt heavier. I don't know if it was the weight of memory or the truth finally sinking into the walls, but I knew what I had to do next. I went up to the attic. Not many people knew about it, not even Emily. It was tucked behind a narrow door near the back of the upstairs hallway. The space was unfinished, dusty, with beams overhead and the smell of cedar and thyme. And that's where I found the box. I hadn't opened it since the week after the fire, the one that burned down my old rental and forced me to Emily's porch in the first place. It had survived the blaze because it was in the trunk of my car, along with a few saved items I never unpacked. I'd stashed it here when I moved the rest of my things in quietly. Inside, photos, letters, receipts, and a folded piece of notebook paper, torn at the edges. It was Emily's handwriting. "Mom, if you're reading this, I guess I couldn't say it to your face. You loved me so hard that I didn't know how to love you back. Every success I had felt like a debt I owed you. Every mistake you made felt like a wound I couldn't stop picking at. I didn't understand what you gave up for me until it was too late." My knees gave out. I sat on the attic floor, the box beside me, and wept, because for the first time I saw her not as the woman who slammed a door in my face, but as the girl I raised, the girl who had been carrying just as much pain as I had. Only hers had turned into walls, and mine had turned into distance. That night, I didn't call her. I did something else. I took down the for sale sign. The next morning, I went to a lawyer. I signed the deed over to Emily's name, but not just as a house, as a responsibility. It came with one condition. The home must be turned into a non-profit residence for women over who've been displaced, rejected, or left with nowhere to go. It wasn't a trap, it was a lifeline. I sent the papers to Emily with a note that read, "Your aesthetic doesn't define your worth, but maybe now it can help rebuild someone else's." The following day, I heard a knock on the door. Emily was standing there. No makeup, no pretense, just tears in her eyes and a folder in her hand. She handed me the papers, signed. "I want to help them," she said. "I want to start with you." And just like that, the door that had once slammed shut opened again. But this time, it opened for so many more. There's a moment, right before dawn, when the sky turns that deep velvet blue and everything feels suspended. Not quite night, not quite morning, just stillness, like the whole world is holding its breath. That's when I stood on the front porch of Rose Harbor, coffee in hand, watching the fog roll in from the marsh. The house was quiet, peaceful, for now. Inside, 2 women were asleep in rooms we'd prepared just the day before. Sandra, who'd been kicked out of her son's home after she broke her hip and became too much work, and Denise, a former teacher who'd lived in her car for nearly a year after her husband drained their retirement and vanished. They weren't statistics to me. They were me, and they were the first. Emily had taken the papers and run with them. She hired a nonprofit consultant, reached out to city leaders, met with social workers. She even set up a small fund to cover initial living expenses. Every decision, every plan, she brought to me first. "Does this feel right, Mama?" she'd ask. I never thought I'd hear her say that again. In between meetings, she helped clean rooms, paint furniture, even drove the old church van across town to pick up donations. And each day she'd ask me questions, real questions. Not the polite, hollow kind that come with small talk, but the kind that meant something. "What did you dream about before you had me? Did you ever want to just run away? Did I make you happy?" That last one took my breath away. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You were the best and hardest thing that ever happened to me." She didn't flinch. She nodded. That's when I knew she was changing. And maybe so was I. But the past wasn't done with us. Not yet. 3 weeks after Rose Harbor officially opened, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Nashville area code. My stomach dropped. The voice on the other end was soft, shaky. "Is this Margaret Walker?" "Yes. I'm so sorry to call like this. I'm Daniel's nurse. I cared for him before he passed. He asked me to reach out if we ever found your number." I sat down slowly, heart pounding. "Heart. He spoke about you every day," she said. "But there's something else. He left something behind for you. Something private." 2 days later, a package arrived at Rose Harbor. Small, wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a leather journal, aged and worn, the spine nearly falling apart. On the first page, in bold, familiar script, "To the woman who carried me in her heart, even when I was too lost to return." I didn't open it right away. I waited until nightfall, until the house was quiet and the tea was hot and the lights were low. Emily sat across from me on the floor, cross-legged, waiting. Together, we read every word, his regrets, his memories, the moment he decided to leave, the moments he tried to come back, the letters he never sent, the one time he stood outside Emily's high school graduation in the shadows, watching from a distance because he didn't know if he deserved to be there. He'd seen us. He'd never stopped seeing us. At the very end, he'd written, "If this journal finds its way to you, it means I finally got something right. Tell Emily I never stopped loving her. Tell her I forgave her. Tell her I understand. Emily pressed her forehead to the pages and wept, not like a child, not like a woman broken, but like someone who'd finally been freed. We buried the journal under the magnolia tree out back, beside a bench we'd painted soft blue. We didn't mark the spot. We didn't need to. Time passed. More women came, each one with a story, each one carrying bags heavier than anything leather or canvas could hold. And every time I heard them say, "I didn't think anyone would take me in," I felt something in my chest expand. Emily became their advocate. I became their storyteller, and together, we became something neither of us had ever truly known, whole. One night, as we sat on the porch swing, her feet tucked under a blanket, my hand resting on hers, she asked, "Do you think he knows what we've built?" I looked out at the house, glowing from within. Laughter floated down from an open window. Someone was playing soft jazz in the parlor. "I think he does," I said, and I meant it, because sometimes redemption isn't loud. It doesn't arrive in a parade or thunderclap. Sometimes, it looks like a woman walking through the front door with shaking hands and tired eyes and finding a bed with fresh sheets and a handwritten note on the pillow that says, "You are home." We saved each other, my daughter and I, not by forgetting what happened, but by choosing to rise from it. And I've learned this much. The most beautiful things don't match anyone's aesthetic. They just feel like they belong, like love, like truth, like coming home after the longest journey of your life. 3 months after Rose Harbor opened its doors, word had spread far beyond Charleston. Local news stations ran a feature calling it a Southern sanctuary for the forgotten. Donations began to pour in. Furniture, books, fresh linens. One man dropped off 5 brand new mattresses with tears in his eyes, whispering, "My mama died alone. I wish she'd had this." But no one knew what really made Rose Harbor sacred. It wasn't the porch swing, or the new garden beds, or the hand-sewn curtains Emily insisted on making herself. It was the women. Women who'd been told they were too loud, too needy, too complicated. Women who'd been left behind by their children, their husbands, or time itself. Every single one carried stories like suitcases bursting at the seams. One of them was Ruth, 82, former jazz singer, 2 strokes. No family left except a nephew who hadn't called in years. She showed up at our gate in a wheelchair with a single bag and a bottle of cheap perfume tucked in the side pocket. "I heard you take women like me," she said. "I don't have much, but I can still hum a tune." We took her in that night. Ruth became our heartbeat. She sang at breakfast, told wild stories about smoky nightclubs and love affairs with saxophone players. The other women gathered around her like moths to flame. She reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Joy isn't just survival. It's singing anyway. Emily adored her. She sat with Ruth every Thursday night, brushing her hair, listening to the same stories again and again, never interrupting, never rushing. I watched them from the hallway, and sometimes, just sometimes, I saw the daughter I'd always hoped she'd become. But not every moment was easy. One night, Ruth collapsed in the hallway. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes rolled back. Emily froze. I didn't. I knelt beside her, called, held her hand until the ambulance came. As they wheeled her out, she looked at me with glassy eyes and whispered, "Don't let me go in silence." I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Emily. We sat in the kitchen, just like we used to when she was a child with nightmares, both of us gripping steaming mugs we didn't drink from. "She's dying," Emily said, voice hollow. "She's living," I corrected, "right now. And until her last breath, we treat her like she matters." Emily stared at me, eyes wide and wounded. "I was so scared," she said. "She looked like you." And that's when I realized this wasn't just about Ruth, or the house, or even Daniel. This was about the fear my daughter had carried for decades, the fear that one day I'd vanish, and she'd be left with nothing but guilt and regret. That fear had made her cruel, but now it was making her brave. Ruth made it through the night, and the next. She came home 5 days later with an oxygen tank and a playlist of Ella Fitzgerald songs we played every afternoon. She was weaker, quieter, but she was still Ruth. On her final morning, she asked for one thing: let me go out singing. We dressed her in a blue velvet robe, sat her on the porch swing with a blanket around her legs. The sun was just beginning to rise when she opened her mouth and sang the first few lines of Misty, her voice soft, trembling, but still hers. By the last note, she was gone. Emily held her hand the entire time. We buried her ashes in the garden, beneath the rose bush we'd planted in her honor. The women each placed a flower on the soil. Emily read a poem she'd written by hand. And I wept openly. Not just for Ruth, but for all of us who had ever been told we were too much, or not enough. That night, Emily crawled into my bed like she did when she was 5. No words, just tears and silence, and that deep, aching kind of love that has nowhere else to go. I held her until she fell asleep. The next morning, I found her in the sunroom, coffee in hand, staring out the window. "I want to write about this place," she said. "The stories, the women, everything." I smiled. "Then start with your own." She turned to me. "You think anyone would want to hear it?" I leaned in, kissed her forehead. "Emily Walker," I said, "your story is the one that built this house." And I meant it, because in the end, it wasn't vengeance that made me whole. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the letter. It was her, choosing to become a woman who didn't just apologize, but changed. And through that change, she gave me something no one else ever had. Not just a second chance, but the life I should have had all along. A week after Ruth's funeral, I found myself sitting alone in the sunroom, sorting through the last of the donation boxes. There were crocheted blankets, a stack of gently used robes, and a handwritten note from a church group in Savannah. Every stitch made with love. I held one of the blankets to my chest. It smelled like lavender and memory. It had been 4 months since I'd bought the house. 4 months since Emily had told me I ruined her aesthetic. 4 months since everything in my life turned upside down, and somehow, through all the heartache, found a way to settle exactly where it needed to. But peace is funny. It shows up not with fireworks or fanfare, but in the quiet moments, the ones where you least expect it, like when Velma barged in, waving a newspaper in the air. "Guess who's front page news again, sugar?" She slapped the Charleston Gazette onto the table. There we were. Me. Emily. A group of women from Rose Harbor, arms around each other in front of the porch, all of us grinning like fools. From rejection to redemption. The home-changing lives in Charleston. I stared at the photo for a long time. Not because I liked looking at myself, I still didn't, but because I barely recognized the woman in the picture. Not the hair, not the dress, but the expression. I looked happy. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the door. It wasn't a delivery or a social worker. It was a boy, maybe 16, thin, nervous, clutching an envelope like it might bite him. "You Margaret?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me the envelope, then turned and ran down the steps before I could ask a single question. Inside was a letter, not typed, written in pen. Careful script. "Mrs. Walker, you don't know me, but I knew your husband. Daniel worked with my mother at the bookstore. He used to talk about you, a lot. Said you were the strongest woman he ever met. He gave me this letter months before he passed, told me to deliver it when the time felt right. I didn't understand what he meant until I saw the news article about Rose Harbor. Now I know. I hope this gives you peace." I sat down slowly. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper. Daniel's handwriting was messier this time. Weaker, but it was his. "Maggie, if you're reading this, it means someone braver than me brought it to you. I wish I could have sat beside you, held your hand, and said these words out loud. But life rarely gives us the endings we want, only the ones we make. I know what I did. I know what I left behind. And I know I didn't deserve your forgiveness, but you loved me anyway. I see that now, in this house, in what you're building. You turned rejection into refuge, pain into purpose. You turned our unfinished story into something beautiful. I'm sorry I couldn't stay, but maybe, in some strange way, you've brought us all home. Always yours, D." I pressed the letter to my chest and cried. Not the kind of tears that break you, the kind that release you. That night I called Emily outside. The moon was high. The air smelled like gardenia. I handed her the letter. She read it in silence, one hand covering her mouth. When she finished, she leaned her head against my shoulder, just like she had as a little girl. "I wish I'd known him better," she whispered. "You still can," I said. "Through this, through us." We sat there until the stars faded into morning, and that's when I knew we'd made it through. Not by erasing what hurt, not by pretending it hadn't happened, but by carrying it, with grace, with grit, and with the unshakable belief that it's never too late to make something good out of what's been broken. Rose Harbor still stands. Women still arrive, bags in hand, eyes wide with fear and hope. And every time, I greet them at the door with a smile and say, "Welcome home," because I've learned the truth. Redemption doesn't knock. Sometimes you have to build the house yourself and leave the door open. It was a Wednesday when the last box was unpacked in the library, a room we never thought we'd fill, now overflowing with donated books, mismatched reading chairs, a grandfather clock that ticked a little offbeat, and sunlight that poured through the windows like grace itself. I ran my fingers along the spines. Romance novels, self-help, old cookbooks, a first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird with someone's name scribbled inside, Gloria. I smiled, thinking how stories survive us. Emily came in behind me, holding a steaming mug of chamomile tea and a folder under her arm. Her face was flushed, glowing in a way that had nothing to do with makeup and everything to do with meaning. She handed me the folder. Inside were the final approval documents from the state. Rose Harbor, Inc., Certified Transitional Living Nonprofit. "It's official now," she said, biting her lip to keep it together. "We're real." I took the papers in hand and nodded slowly. "You were always real," I whispered. "You just had to remember." We spent the afternoon hanging photos in the hallway, portraits of the women who'd stayed with us, each framed with their names etched below, not just to honor them, to see them as people, as stories, as proof that second chances can grow roots. Velma joined us with a tray of lemon bars and sass. "Y'all gonna cry every time someone hangs a picture?" she teased. "Probably," I said, grinning. "Good," she nodded. "Means you haven't turned into stone statues just yet." Later that evening, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, not fixing my hair, not adjusting my clothes, just looking, really looking. And for the first time in decades, I didn't see a woman who had been left, rejected, or forgotten. I saw someone whole. That's when I remembered something from long ago. A list I'd written in the back of my old journal. A list titled, "When I Have a Home Again." I dug through the drawers until I found it. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the words were still there. A porch swing that creaks, a kitchen full of noise, laughter in the halls, music at night, peace in my bones, a daughter who sees me. I'd checked every box. I folded the list carefully, pressed it between two books on the shelf, and walked back into the hallway. That's when I saw her, Emily, standing by the front door, hands tucked in the pockets of her sweater, watching the evening settle in through the glass. When she turned around, there were tears in her eyes, again, but this time they were soft, grateful. She reached for my hand, held it like it was something sacred. "I found something today," she said quietly. She led me to the office and handed me an envelope, a new one, unopened, postmarked from Tennessee. No return address. Inside was a black and white photo. Daniel, me, Emily, no more than 3. On his shoulders, all of us laughing. On the back, scribbled in blocky handwriting, "She turned out just fine." No signature. No explanation. Just one final whisper from the universe. And I smiled. Not because it made sense, but because it didn't have to. Life never wraps up in neat little bows. It twists, it unravels, it bends in ways we never see coming. But if we're lucky, if we're brave, it gives us chances to heal what we thought was lost forever. That night, we lit candles in the window, not for the dead, but for the living, for every woman still on the road, still searching, still hoping. The porch was full of voices, laughter, hands holding hands under warm throws. Someone played guitar softly. The scent of cornbread and cinnamon drifted through the air. And I thought, this is the ending I never knew I wanted, but it's the one I earned. Not through perfection, through resilience, through truth, through love that refused to give up, even when it was told it didn't belong. Emily looked at me and said, "Mama, you built this." I shook my head. "We built this, and that's how you reclaim your story. Not by erasing the pain, but by filling the silence it left behind with voices that say, you still matter. You are not alone. You are home." The fall air was crisp the morning I found the letter tucked beneath my porch pillow. I almost missed it. I had come out early before sunrise, wrapped in my old flannel robe, ready to sip coffee and listen to the creak of the porch swing like I did every morning now. But when I leaned back, I felt something crinkle underneath me. A plain envelope. No stamp, no name. Just one word on the front. Margaret. I stared at it for a long time. Emily was inside, still asleep. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of birds waking up and the occasional whistle of a car passing down the hill. The rest of the women were asleep too. A calm had settled over Rose Harbor, one of those rare, golden mornings where everything feels suspended in grace. I opened the envelope with steady hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, formal, and then I saw the header, the law office of Franklin and Maynard. At first, my heart sank. I thought maybe there was unfinished business from Daniel, or worse, some dispute over the house, the nonprofit, a tangle of legal red tape I hadn't seen coming. But no, it wasn't bad news. It was a gift. The letter explained that Daniel's small estate, mostly made up of a pension, a few royalties from a book project, and a modest life insurance policy, had named me the primary beneficiary. There was more. He had designated a percent, to be transferred directly to Rose Harbor under a special clause, for the continuation of the love that was never lost, only misplaced. I pressed my hand to my mouth and wept right there on the porch swing. The letter clutched to my chest. He hadn't forgotten. He'd prepared. In his own quiet way, Daniel had come home too. Later that day, I told Emily. She didn't say a word, just wrapped her arms around me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. She whispered, "He never stopped trying to fix it, did he?" "No," I said. "And neither did you." With the inheritance, we expanded Rose Harbor, added 2 more bedrooms, a new communal kitchen, a small writing room overlooking the marsh, Emily's idea. We called it Daniel's room, not because of guilt, because of hope. Word traveled fast. Within weeks, we had interviews lined up, more funding. Even a woman from the New York Times called. Emily handled it all with grace. I watched her on the phone, clipboard in one hand, glasses perched on her nose. My daughter. No longer a woman trapped in pride and perfection. Now she led with purpose. One night, we hosted a candlelight dinner. All the women, staff, friends from town, even Velma put on lipstick. As we sat around the table, passing bowls of mashed potatoes and cornbread, someone asked, "What do you call this place, really? A shelter? A home?" I smiled and looked at Emily, and she answered, "This," she said, "is a beginning." Everyone went quiet, because it was true. Rose Harbor wasn't just a house. It was the start of 100 second chances. Mine, Emily's, Ruth's, Daniel's, and maybe yours too. So if you're reading this, or listening, or sitting in your own silence, wondering if anyone would ever open the door for you again, I want you to know something. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be polished. You don't need to match the aesthetic. You just need to keep going, because somewhere out there, a door is waiting to open. And someone is standing on the other side, whispering the words that saved my life. Welcome home. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.